are you and what is it that you do?
Who am I? I'm Judith Margaret Evans Deverell, and I am married to Neil Sydenham Deverell, and I have 6 children, and 2 of them are from a former partner and 4 of my children are with Neil. I have my 6 children: Bianca, Eric, Kezia and Peter, who are twins, and Felicity and Nathaniel. And I live in Totara North, Whangaroa Harbour, and far north of New Zealand. And I live in a lovely old pioneer villa in New Zealand. I mean, obviously live in New Zealand. What else? Who am I?
What do you do?
What I do, I'm a writer, and I'm supposed to be a housewife, aren't I? But I love writing, and that's my passion, I suppose. Writing what fiction, non-fiction, poetry, whatever. Yeah.
And you were from Wales?
Yes, from Wales, from Cardiff, from a northern suburb of Cardiff called Whitchurch.
What was it like growing up in Wales?
Probably the best thing was the view from my bedroom window of the hills, because I didn't like suburbia. I was thinking of that earlier today, actually. My feeling that I, as a child, when I got to be about 10 or 11, I just figured out that I didn't really belong in this world, and I didn't really belong anywhere, and especially not in suburbia. I couldn't stand it. And at I think I was 11, 10 and a half, 11, I did my best to escape suburbia. And so one day I thought I would just leave, and so I walked down the road, and I kept walking and walking, and I tried to get lost. I tried to lose myself so I could walk out, maybe get to the hills that I could see from my bedroom window. But when you're only 10 and a half or 11, whatever, I didn't really know. And unfortunately, I ended up going in a complete circle, and I ended up at home, walking back home, and it was very disappointing. I didn't get anywhere, but I spent a long time getting nowhere. So
So you grew up in Wales, and then what did you study? What did you become? Who were you?
I went to school on the bus, the number 24 bus from Whitchurch to Llandaff, every day from the age of 7 till 16. So my entire life from 17 to 16 was lived on the number 24 bus, on that top deck, on the front seat, and knowing nobody else on the bus, because there was nobody else in my school. And I went to a school called Clive Hall School for Girls, a posh little school in Llandaff, very small, just in a kind of a mansion that the walls around it formed a complete block, a city block. And I spent 20 years trying to get over the nightmares of that experience of school. So what else?
What sort of a family, to show a contrast of where you ended up, of how you brought up?
Okay, so I went to Clive Hall School, as I said, on bus, and my sister did also for a couple of years, until they asked my parents to take her out because it probably wasn't the right environment for her. So she went next door. We lived next door to the local high school, and you just climbed over the brick wall, and then you were in the playgrounds of the school. And I could have gone there too, but my parents wanted me to go to this little private school. So my sister got to go climb over the wall, and she was in the school. And then my 2 brothers, they were sent from the age of 7 to preparatory schools. These are boarding schools and preparatory schools, and so few of those in Wales. And then when they got older, they went to Dauntley's, a big boarding school in Wiltshire, which was about 400 miles away from Cardiff, where we lived. And so I didn't see them very much, that was a bit, unfortunate, but it's okay. And our family was into sailing, and my dad had, from childhood, we always had boats. We always had dinghies. We were taught to row from time we were able to hold the oars. We were taught to row, and then Dad gradually got bigger and bigger boats. We sailed on the Bristol Channel, and then when I was about 15, something, or 14, no, from 13 on, we bought a caravan and stayed on the Milford Haven and Lorenie, the upper reaches of the Lorenie, and my dad had a yacht there, and so sailing was a very big part of our family weekends, and all sorts of things.
You ended up running away to sea. How did that?
Okay, so fast forward to when I was 20. Oh no, bit backtrack. So when I finished school, I went to a Polytech in Cardiff, again on a bus. And I mentioned that the time on the bus because that formed more and more of my isolation, I suppose, that created a sense of living in my imagination, and I created unlimited number of stories and scenarios, and wrote books and stories in my head, because I couldn't, as I said, I didn't like suburbia. I didn't feel I belonged even in this world, so I lived in my imagination. And so anyway, I went after school. I went to the Polytech to do this is crazy. I didn't know what to do when I left school, because I had been told that I was not academic enough to do what I wanted all my childhood. I wanted to be an occupational therapist and help people with craft work, but because they didn't think I would get enough O-levels, my mother decided the best thing was to prepare me for marriage. And so she thought that if I went and did a course of hotel and catering operations, a 2-year diploma course that had 21 different subjects, which were pretty practical, and maybe that would help me do something in my life. Maybe I'd know how to cook and clean a house, and maybe that would help me. So of course it wasn't anything that I wanted to do. I just obeyed my lovely mummy. I adored my mummy, and she signed me up for it. So I went along for 2 years, and it was so ridiculous, but I did learn how to cook. And we had, the best subject was social studies, where we were allowed to do a project, and it was assumed that we would do a project that was related to hotel and catering, which was supposed to be what we were training to be and do. I did a project on early medieval costume and I had this big enormous art book, and I filled it for a few months, drawings of medieval clothing, costume. And you can imagine the surprise of my teacher. He said, "Miss Evans, I really feel that you're not quite in the right course. I can't give you any marks for this because it's not in any way in the category in which it's meant to be done, but I think it's amazing, and I think you're amazing." But yeah. So that was funny. And so then from then, of course, I had absolutely no intention of having a job in that field, but my father thought otherwise, and took me for a few interviews, and apparently I was overqualified to be whatever the interview took me for was like, to work in a beautiful country hotel.
You got overqualified?
I was overqualified. Yes, they just kind of needed a cleaning maid, chambermaid, and they saw that I had a diploma in management, so they said, what on earth are you doing here? And so sadly I didn't get that job, because it was the only one, that's why I remember it, the only one that I would have happily enjoyed doing. It was a lovely country place. So anyway, so that didn't work, so my parents sent me to a secretarial college, the London College of Secretaries in London, Portland Place, just opposite Regent's Park. It was a residential college, and the one good thing, I did learn to type, which was very helpful. Like, I can touch type and I can write everything with my eyes shut and my hands on the keyboard and write, and I cannot type as fast as I can think. So it's a huge benefit as a writer to be able to type really well. But with the shorthand, I did get up to 120 words per minute, but I failed the diploma because I was 10 words short. So I failed the diploma, and so didn't want to be a secretary. My dad wanted me to be a secretary, so he took me.
And then, so how did you end up at sea?
How did I?
Did you get a successful job?
No.
You didn't end up with it.
Most interviews, they said, Miss Evans, did you actually go to college?
They actually asked you that?
They actually asked me, 2 people, did you actually go to college? Because my interview was just appalling. It was like I couldn't do anything. And so my dad got me a job in Cardiff with a solicitor friend of his. My dad's a chartered accountant. He had 4 different practices throughout South Wales. And so his kind solicitor friend took me on to be his secretary and gave me 3 weeks. And the poor man, he endured me for 3 weeks. I couldn't do shorthand. I've forgotten everything. I couldn't do it at all. And so he got me set up with audio, and I couldn't do that either. And so then he got me to load the computer, and in those days the computer was the size of a garage. And so the garage next to this lovely home that was his office, the solicitor, it was a gigantic old-fashioned computer, and my job was to load in this big huge disk, big black disk, and it's called booting in, and I had to boot it in every morning. And one morning I put it in and it blew up. It blew up, bang. And I was fired. Yeah, so that was the end of that job. And so my dad took me on himself and asked me to be a secretary to him in Pontypridd. So I used to walk down to Llandaff over the railway bridge and get on a train from Llandaff to Pontypridd, and I loved that. I loved going on the train. But I was utterly useless because at secretarial college I'd never learned how to use the tab key. I ran away to see. Oh yeah, now I was telling you how I got to that point. And that I was in London from the time I was 18 to 19. And during that time, my mother became ill with depression. And I heard from my father through letters that she was taken from various mental health nursing homes in England, from place to place, and that eventually Dad took her to live at a big house that he'd made for us all on the upper reaches of the Milford Haven and Pembrokeshire. And how did I get back to Pembrokeshire? Failed in all my jobs, fired from this, that and the other, totally useless as a secretary, didn't know what to do with myself. So my parents had come home, and the idea was that I was sort of to look after my mother, and I did my best, but I didn't know how one looked after a mother. I was 20 years old, very insecure, very self-centered, very insecure, very everything like that. Didn't know anything or who I was, but I was starting to get a glimpse of that. So I started drawing some amazing pictures that emerged out of my spirit. But anyway, so I stayed at the court. This is a mansion my dad had built for us, which was ridiculous, when all the children leaving home, going to university, and there's just the mother and the father at home in this big giant house. It was, and Mum taken away from Cardiff, where she had a wonderful social life, and she was the chair lady of this, that and the other charities. The Society, the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was her main love, and taken away from her circle of friends and that, and put 200 miles away in this beautiful house in this tiny village where she knew not a soul. And it was a big house and a big property in the middle of this village that she knew no one, and you're suffering from depression, so what was going to happen to my mum? And so I went there to try and look after her. She spent her time in one of the lounges knitting, endless knitting, and I would sit there and I didn't know how to talk to her, and I absolutely adored my mother, absolutely adored her, and so did everybody. She was just beautiful. And so I couldn't handle it, and so I went down the road, because my uncle had, in this little tiny ancient village, he had a little ancient cottage with walls about 3 foot thick, because he's an architect, and so he turned it into this beautiful home. And I stayed there with my uncle and his latest girlfriend, and my uncle collected hippies. He had a big garden that went right down to the creeks. There's just a beautiful lot of creeks at the edge of the Milford Haven, the upper reaches of the Milford Haven. And he just loved young people, and he had all kinds of very interesting young people. And when you're 20 and there's all these lovely young people around who are so different from me, so like such a sheltered upbringing, and here with these people smoking dope and being high, and it was very interesting. And I really liked one of them, and I kind of like sort of, what do they call it, hooked up with one of those. But he was lovely. He treated me with respect because he knew I was a pure and innocent little person, and he respected that, so that was lovely. But anyway, while I was there, I felt a freedom I'd never had as a teenager, back in Wales. In Cardiff. And in this environment of freedom and of hippies doing their own thing, and I just got a lot of drawing books, and I started drawing, and without thinking, and I drew pictures, a series of pictures of, and I know they're just like, it's like how if you let go and just with a pen and piece of paper, what's inside you comes out. And what I was drawing were endless pictures of the sea, the ocean, with a hand sticking up through it, like that, like this big dark ocean, and just a hand stretching up. So in hindsight, I can see that was kind of like a cry for help, isn't it? You're under an ocean, you don't know what on earth's going on, where you are, and you put your hand up above the ocean, it's kind of like, help. And I did then a whole series of mermaid pictures, and a mermaid is half a girl and half a fish, and so I would be diving under the water. I had this understanding that I didn't know God, I didn't believe in God, but I was deeply knew I didn't belong in this world, and I just was so looking for I don't know what. But I believed it was as I would die, and as a mermaid going under the water and stretching my hands down, that at the very bottom of the ocean there was a pearl of great price. And I did this whole series of drawings, of reaching down to the bottom of an ocean, picking up this pearl, and of going, and then that ended. There was later on, a year or so later, I did a series of pictures that were stenciled. They were handmade paper cut out with same images. Yeah, anyway, and I had an exhibition and they all sold. Anyway, I'm digressing because you asked me how did I run away to sea when I was 20 years old. Gradually getting there. Okay, well, at least I remembered that much. That's amazing, because I lose my thread of thoughts very quickly. I lose my train of thoughts very quickly. But anyway, so I was in my uncle's house and I was washing the dishes and helping my... Oh, he was actually married to this one. So, okay, so that was Auntie Jane. So, and then there was a knock on the door, and anyway, my uncle came towards me and he took my hands out of the sink and held my hand, and he didn't speak to me, and we just walked out the door and we walked down the lane, and then we walked up the lane to the end of the village where my parents' house was, called the Court. And he didn't speak the entire walk, but he held my hand, and I knew my mother was dead, but he hadn't said anything, and there was no reason to suppose whatsoever that my mother should be dead. But I walked into the house and my dad came towards me with his arms outstretched and tears pouring down his face, and he said, she's gone, and wrapped me up in his arms. And then I was sat down by this strange lady, I didn't know who she was, with this beautiful glass of golden liquid, which apparently was whiskey. And so I just drank this orange liquid. I didn't know what it was, and then wondered why I was starting to feel floating. And so that helped my absolute confusion, like, what? My mother really is dead? Yeah. And so I had the 3 weeks where I was coming to grips with my mother's death by suicide, and I didn't do too well at it. My way of coping was to go to bed and go to sleep, and I'd never been able to sleep in the daytime, but I just spent the moment I lay down in the afternoon, I would just be totally asleep. So I slept my way out of that part of the grief. And then after 3 weeks, my brother thought it wasn't a very good idea that I slept all the time, so he organised for me to, well, it was like a job, to teach people how to sail a Polynesian catamaran, 22-foot Hina moa, because my parents had some lovely but very unusual friends, James and Ruth Warren. They lived on a 51-foot Tahini Polynesian catamaran that James had designed, and he and his other 4 wives. Very interesting. I was scared that he wanted me to be another wife, so I was very cautious. I didn't want to be on the boat. So when my brother said, you know, why don't you help out James and his harem to teach people how to sail these catamarans, because he sells the plans and he wants people to know what the boat is like so that they can want to buy the plans and build their own Polynesian catamaran. So the first person I took out for, you know, a trial sail on this 22-foot Polynesian catamaran was a guy who had sailed single-handed to Milford Haven. He was Austrian, but had lived in America for quite a few years, and he'd sailed to see James Warren because he was interested in buying the plans to build one of these Polynesian catamarans that James designed. So I took him out, and yes, I didn't like him. I was a bit scared of him, but anyway, I sailed up and down the harbour, and then I took him back, and he wanted to come home with me to my parents' place, so I invited him back for dinner with my dad and whoever else was in the house, I don't know. Yes, and oh my goodness, what do I say? It's a bit embarrassing. No, okay.
That was it.
I don't. Well, yeah. I went to. Yeah. Okay. I went with that guy on his beautiful little yacht, 28-foot gaff rig, friendship sloop, and I sailed away with him.
Why did you sail away with him?
He asked me to sail with him, and I remember walking down the beach with my little backpack, all my possessions in the world, leaving my home, knowing that I needed to run away, I needed to escape. My mum had just killed herself and my dad had taken up with another woman, which was bizarre because my dad adored my mother, but he just couldn't bear the thought of being alone, so this other lady filled the place, and it was something not able to be comprehended by my little pathetic little mind. So when he asked me to go with him, to be with him, you know, to live with him or whatever, I said yes. But and as we were walking down the beach to get into the dinghy to get onto the boat, I had this incredible sense that this was my destiny. This was the adventure to for the rest of my life, and this is the path of being different, of finding eventually that where I belonged. And I knew it would be hard, but the sense of destiny was very strong. And so even though I didn't really like him, I went to live with him on this boat, sailed away, and we sailed from the Milford Haven to down the Bristol Channel, round the Scilly Isles, round to Plymouth. And we stayed in Plymouth for a while. And in Plymouth I got incredibly sick. I got very high fever, and I was so sick I was on, going unconscious and everything. So he was a little bit concerned, so he picked me up in his arms and he carried me through the town to the nearest hospital. And I remember spending a few weeks in and out of consciousness there. And it's glandular fever, and but they didn't know. Because he had come from foreign parts, he'd sailed across the Atlantic and been to the Azores and all sorts of beautiful places. They thought that maybe there's something in the water and I might have got some sort of strange tropical disease or something, but in the end they just thought maybe it was glandular fever. So anyway, when I got better after a few weeks in hospital, he came to pick me up, and I said no, I didn't want to continue being with him. And so my brother and sister, my twin brother and sister, drove down from West Williamston and Pembrokeshire to Plymouth to pick me up. And I went back to live with my father and his new lady, and with my brother, and I lived there for a little while, recovering. And then one day my dad said to me, "Oh, Judith, why did you leave him? He was a boat builder. He was an amazing man, and you'll never find another man, you're very silly. You should go back to him." And I did. On that one sentence, my dad said, "You're silly to leave him. No other man will ever want you." Okay. When you're 20, you say, oh, your dad tells you that, you can't believe it. So I got on the train and I went back to Plymouth. He picked me up from the train station, and I thought, oh, what am I doing? But I did it, and I went back, and he was nice to me, and that was probably the nicest time we had together. And I suppose it was like a honeymoon. But that was the only nice time I ever had with him. But anyway, it was an adventure, and I knew it was my destiny. And so I sailed away from Plymouth, and where did we go from Plymouth? We went to Gibraltar. So we sailed all down the coast. We sailed across the Bay of Biscay in a storm, because there's always storms in the Bay of Biscay. And I remember praying, if we survive the storm, please God help me, if we survive. And we did survive, so maybe God help me. And we went to Cadiz on the northwest corner of Spain, and then we went down the coast. It was beautiful places, down the coast of Portugal, Lisbon, and then we hit another storm from Lisbon south, and we were under bear poles from Lisbon right down to the bottom of Portugal. and survived that. And then we went to Gibraltar, and we stayed in Gibraltar for a while. I loved Gibraltar. It was amazing, beautiful place. And then we hitchhiked from Gibraltar to Innsbruck in Austria, because his mother lived in Innsbruck, and we thought we'd go and live with his mum and work for about 6 months to earn some money so that we could continue just sailing.
But when your letters start to Uncle Martin?
I guess so, yeah. Yeah. It was quite interesting. Like, from Gibraltar to Madrid, I think we got a bus. We hadn't hitchhiked yet. That we got from Gibraltar, somehow we got to Madrid, and from Madrid we decided we would be hitchhiking, and we were walking through the city, and that was the first time I knew that I shouldn't be with this guy. he kicked me and treated me abominably, but anyway, what do? You're all alone in the world apart from this man. So anyway, we ended up in Innsbruck and lived with his mum, and she was nice. We lived in her apartment, and we got jobs. Herman got a job in an optic factory with lenses, grinding lenses or something, and I got a job in a flower shop, a Blumengeschäft, and I loved that actually. And then from there, we were there about 9 months, and then we had enough money, and we...
You talked about a jump in your letters. Something.
A jump? What?
Oh, you wanted one of your mum's...
Sorry?
You went there with all your summer clothes. In the letters you were talking about her.
I had nothing. As I said, when I ran away from home, I had a very small backpack, like a day pack. My only possessions in the world were what fit in a day pack. And do you know what was in it? A set of Winnie the Pooh books that my mother had won as being a prize student. So I had my mother's set of Winnie the Pooh and about two jeans and 2 t-shirts and 1 jumper. and my mother's jewellery box. That was all that was in the bag. Yeah, that would have been true if I would have had to write for clothes, because I didn't have anything, and we were in the winter in Innsbruck. We had snow. It was beautiful. Yeah. So what?
Anyway, so then you went back to the boat. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Just
from
you were
Innsbruck
just
we went.
looking to save money.
Yes. So yeah, just to get some money. So somehow we got back to Gibraltar. No, we didn't. Sorry. No. From Innsbruck we got a train to Britain, and we went... That's right. We had a commission to skipper a yacht from Cork in Southern Ireland, from Cork to Gibraltar, back to Gibraltar where our boat was, where we'd left the boat. So, and in Southern Ireland, my sister had a nannying job, and she decided she'd come with us. So, and the boat we skippered belonged to a group of doctors, gynecologist doctors from Austria, and we sailed their boat. Yeah, as we said, we sailed their boat. Annette, my sister, and Herman, and 2 of these doctors from Austria to Gibraltar. I don't know what happened then. We got back on our own boat, and I think his mother came down from Innsbruck, and she spent 2 weeks with us. Yeah, that's right. We were sailing. There's lots of photographs of sailing in very calm waters with his mother and my sister and myself and Herman. And after that, we prepared to sail to Africa. And we went to the Azores, Canary Islands, and I remember we went from Gibraltar to Gran Canaria to Las Palmas, and we bought there a round of cheese like a wheel and rolled it along the deck. There's this one memory that sticks out of Las Palmas. So we stocked up on what we needed, and we left Las Palmas. for Dakar, and I think it was meant to be. No, I can't remember how long we anticipated the voyage to be, but we never made it. And somebody crying. Okay, we didn't read the pilot book, so I don't know why. One of these destiny things. So we didn't realise that there was an insetting current from about 100 miles, nautical miles north of Dakar, insetting into the coast. So we had a course set for the city of Dakar, but we were being swept eastwards, and in the middle of the night we went bump. Yeah, we hit a sandbar, and we thought we were. It was lovely weather. It was really lovely weather, and I remember it was my watch. I was on watch at night, and I saw in a direct. Oh, wait a minute, we're sailing that way, and so I looked to my left, and I could see the sun. No, sorry, the moon. The moon shining on. I thought it was the water, but of course it wasn't the water. It was the coast of Africa. It was the Sahara coast, the Sahara Desert of Mauritania. And I just thought, oh, it must have been a illusion, because we're far off the coast. It must be just the moon shining on the water. And so I went down. I left the tiller. I tied it up. I tied the tiller up so the boat would self-steer herself for a little while. And I went down and made a cheese sandwich with this beautiful round of cheese we had bought in Las Palmas. And while I was making my sandwich, the boat suddenly came to a grinding halt, and absolute chaos. Everything. There must have been some wind, because the sails were flapping. Those ropes thrashing around everywhere. You know, Herman and my sister screaming, and general chaos. And big breakers. We'd got that line, that white line that the moon had been shining on, was a line of breakers on the coast of West Africa. So we were in the breakers, and we hit a sandbar, would be about 100 meters off the coast, and we bounced the boat because of the waves. The waves lifted us over that sandbar and then tossed and turned us like just a cork on just tossed by the waves onto the beach. But it was dark, but there was the moon. Well, the moon was shining, and then just chaos. Just had shipwreck. Like I remember being washed off the bow. One wave, I looked up, and as I looked up, it just hit me and threw me off the boat into the water. And then I don't know what happened, but it was like the next wave just lifted me back onto the boat. I was thrown against the bobstay. So it was an old-fashioned sort of beautiful boat with a bowsprit, and I was thrown into the bobstay, and then climbed up onto the bobstay and climbed up onto the bowsprit, and then onto the boat. So I didn't drown at that time. And then gradually at dawn.
So you just cleaned the boat as it was being bashed against the sand?
Yes.
You didn't try and leave it, you were just, because you were on, it wasn't sinking.
No, it was on the sand, but it was very deep. It was very, very steep, shelving beach. And so anyway, my next memory, because this is a long time ago, I was 20 and I'm now advanced in years. And the next memory, there's so many memories. I remember being on the beach, and I'm wearing my one and only jumper that I had worn since I was 16, and I'm now 20. So one jumper. And I ran down the beach because I could see something over a sand dune, like the roof of a hut, and it was a hut. And in the hut was an elderly gentleman and his elderly wife, and it was just a little stick hut in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of sand dunes. And I talked to him in French, but he didn't even know French. It was French, the language of the hut. I could speak a little bit of French. but he only spoke his native language, as was Wolof, and so with sign language I managed to express the fact that we were in dire straits and please could you help if there's any way you could help. And so he came with me. And then as I got there, some natives from a tiny village south, further the other way, from the opposite direction, and they were tall, beautiful African women, were wearing the most amazing garments, very pretty, beautiful material, very beautiful women, and they just stood there and they didn't speak. And the elderly gentleman that had come with me, in sign language, somehow communicated that if we went directly inland for a few miles, we would come to a road, and if we got to the road, then we would get help because the road would go directly to Dakar. So that was the information we got from that guy. And then these other women, they just stood there in a line, lining the beach, watching us desperately trying to save our boat. And Herman put on his diving gear. He put on all his diving weights around his waist and got the anchor and intended to walk the anchor through the breakers out to that sandbar, put the anchor on the sandbar and come back, and we could pull the boat somehow. Some crazy idea that we could pull ourselves off the beach, which it wasn't going to work, but what do you do, you know? So I saw him walking off under the water, and then he got into difficulties and he was being swept away, and I could see him wave his arm, and I think he was shouting, but because the noise of the waves, obviously I couldn't hear anything. My sister and I just, my immediate response was to save him, and so I just jumped into the water and swam through the waves, which was ridiculous. It was like just suicide, and I was getting bowled by the big waves, and my sister had to save me then. So she had more brains than me, and she tied a rope around her waist, and she eventually got to me. And I grabbed hold of the rope, and I eventually pulled myself. My voice is going. I eventually pulled myself ashore, more dead than alive. I was a bit full of water, but I was all right. I recovered, and after a while, we sat on the upturned dinghy. Oh, that's another thing. Like, okay, you can't walk an anchor out, so I got the wrong way around. We tried to row the anchor out before he tried to walk it out. It was useless, and I got memories of this in the dinghy, my sister and Herman with the anchor in the dinghy, heading out into these huge waves, and the dinghy going vertically up in the air and coming down on top of them. It did a complete 360. Oh no, 180, isn't it? Landed on top of them. It was a disaster. It didn't work. That's why he had to walk it out. And then after that episode, then we pulled the dinghy out of the reach of the waves, and Herman and I sat on this dinghy and pledged undying love to each other, which was just ridiculous. But this is what happens when you face death and you've lost everything and at the end of the world, and you look at one another and, oh well. And it was kind of like we got married then, just sitting on the dinghy, having just faced death. So that was it. That was our connection then. And then dawn, there's more light, daytime. What do you do next? You've got to rescue everything out of the boat, take everything out of the boat, put it up on above the high tide line. And so we went on board and bagged everything in sail bags, all our possessions in bags. And the native women who had this entire time had been standing watching us, and even when my sister put that rope around herself to come and rescue me, had left the end of the rope on the beach, believing that the native women would hold the end of the rope and pull us in, but they didn't touch the rope, but that's okay. And anyway, they decided they'd like to help us at this stage when we're taking everything out of the boat. And sadly, a lot of our possessions disappeared at that stage, because these women had the most beautiful, voluminous material. They were beautiful dresses, and I think a lot of things were disappeared in these lovely dresses. Especially this mirror. For my 21st birthday, Herman had in Austria, in Innsbruck in Austria, he'd made me this beautiful hand-carved mirror, lindenwood, and he'd put a lot of work. He'd spent months doing it, and it was a beautiful creation. It was beautiful carving in it, and that went in some lady's dress, so it disappeared. And then we set up a tent at the top of the beach, a makeshift. We got some sails, got the spars, spare spars, the boom, the gaff, and the oars, and we set them all up into the soft sand and put the sails over it to make a shade from the sun, because it was starting to get very hot. As you can imagine, the Sahara Desert in the middle of the day would be very hot, and it was. And what the possessions we had that managed to get to the shelter, we put there. And then Herman decided they would, my sister and Herman would follow the directions of that lovely elderly gentleman that I'd spoken of earlier. And so they got a 2-litre bottle of water, 2 litres between 2 people, and walked inland. And I didn't see them again for a few days. And so I was left to guard what was left of our possessions on the beach. And before he left, Herman taught me how to load the revolver and the rifle. No, well, yeah, he did it for me. He loaded the revolver with six bullets, but he didn't load the rifle because he'd already taught me how to do that, and so he assumed that I would be able to do that myself. So he left me with these 2 guns, and he laughed because he said, "There's no way you'll need these, and you'll be fine. We'll be back as soon as possible. You'll be fine," and took off. And I was there alone 3 days. Yeah, as soon as they had gone, probably about an hour after they disappeared, then a whole lot of young people appeared from nowhere. Lovely African young people. There would have been teenagers and children, teenagers and children, and they've seemed amazing, but they had a plan, and they made a circle all the way around my makeshift tent, and there were enough of them to make a complete circle, and they sat cross-legged all around. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, what lovely people. And I tried to sort of talk to them, but they didn't wish to communicate with me, and that's okay. And then suddenly, at a signal of the leader, obviously one of them was quite tall and seemed to be a leader, they started to run in and grab something and run off with it up the sand dunes and take off with it. And because everything was in boxes or sail bags, it was quite convenient to grab something and take off. And they had this plan: if one came from one side of the tent thing, another, and I'm sort of dealing with that situation, saying, "Hey, what are you doing? You know, what's going on?" And then somebody from behind me would run in behind me and take something. And this went on for 3 days until there was not much left. And in between that, so at sundown on that first day, they left before sundown, and so I was alone. Yes, I was alone, wondering, what was going to happen. And then suddenly the elderly gentleman appeared, and he had a mat under his arm and a little boy with him, a grandson, and a bowl, an orange wooden bowl, shallow orange wooden bowl of thin milk. And he offered me this, and so I had something to eat or drink. It was a bowl of thin milk, and he unrolled his mat and sat cross-legged outside my makeshift tent with his little, I think it must have been his grandson, because he was quite elderly, so it would have been his grandson. And he got out his beads. He would be a Muslim person, and he was telling his beads and obviously praying to his God. That's right. And I called him the holy man in all my thinking about him. You know, the elderly gentleman I called him the holy man. Yeah, the holy man who's sitting on his mat, obviously praying. Playing with his beads, speaking silently to his God, and it brought me peace. And the little grandson was asleep, curled up beside him. And I was inside our makeshift tent, beside a box, and leaning against the box. And on the box was a hurricane lantern on. I lit it, and the light was comforting. So I was just sitting by the light. I didn't sleep those nights, and nobody could sleep anyway, because there were ghost crabs, what they call ghost crabs. They're see-through. That's why they're called ghost crabs, because they're almost transparent. They are opaque, but they look transparent, and they click-clack. They made a ghastly click-clack noise, and I spent the entire time brushing them off me. They were quite big, about 8 inches. Yeah, pretty interesting creatures. And so I'm just sitting beside this box with the light and being comforted by the fact that there was a light and that somebody outside was praying for me to a God I didn't believe in. Any God. I don't know, I didn't. And one minute the light was there comforting me, and the next minute it wasn't. There was no light. And I put my hand out to feel where that lantern was, but there was no lantern, and there was no sound. It had not fallen down. It was just not there. And to this day I can't figure out what happened. All I can think, in a natural way, that it was, I must have just gone to sleep sitting up and somebody came in and stole it. But I don't remember being asleep. I don't even remember shutting my eyes. I was so terrified. And there was no light. Anyway, so that was bizarre. And so the rest of the time I had no light. And then the next night, and in the morning, the holy man he went away, he rolled up his mat, took his little grandson, and then he came back and he had a bowl, the same orange, shallow orange wooden bowl, filled with very thin milk. And I drank that, and then he went away again. And then at sundown that next day, he came again at sundown with the same bowl of milk. Filled it up again. And he sat there in the same performance again. But it was more terrifying because it was pitch dark and very dark. And then suddenly this holy man's walking towards me, and he came and bent down to me, and he tapped me on my shoulder and beckoned to me, like saying, it sounded like, come on, come outside, quick, come out. And so I obeyed and went outside, and I looked in the direction of his pointing arm, and behind this tent thing were huge sand dunes, and there was this little black figure zigzagging down the sand dunes coming towards me, obviously to steal again in the middle of the night, thinking this little white girl is asleep or something, we can take more of her stuff, because we were like Santa Claus.
Was this at night?
This was at night, in the middle of the night.
How could you see with the moon?
Yeah, there must have been a moon. Yes, because I could see, yes, there was a moon, but it was in the middle of the night, and there was enough light from the moon to see the figures zigzagging down these huge sand dunes. And so the holy man motioned to me to get my gun, and I got it, and then he motioned that I should hold it up into the air and point up to the sky and shoot, and I did, and it made a terrific noise, and I could see those little figures scurrying back, zigzagging back the way they had come, and they left and they didn't come back. The noise at night seemed to be pretty loud. Oh, and with that gun I had used it, I had on the next day as they are stealing, and they did the same thing, the circle around my makeshift tent in the same pattern, dive in, grab a box or a bag, and then as I'm dealing with that, someone from behind me would do the same thing. And then I started to lose it. And I thought, hey, what's going on here? And when they took our radio, I thought, well, we don't have much left. And when they took the radio, which we didn't have, as I said, we didn't have any navigational equipment on our boat. We sailed with a sextant, a wristwatch, a transistor radio to get the time, and the books, the Airtable books to do the maths for the sextant, and charts. That's all we had. So without a transistor radio, you can't navigate because you can't get a time tick. And so I was angry, and so I pointed the gun and I shot, and of course I did not aim to shoot any or hit anybody, but it made a loud noise, and I did that 4 times. I used 4 bullets, and I had 6 and I used 4, and they scurried away and they went away, and I didn't like frightening them. And then another memory I have is realizing that at the high tide, our boat, which was holed, the side was stoved in. Is that the right word? Stoved in. I had to do something to save this boat. So I kept realigning the anchors that were holding the mast. So we had got the main halyard from the main mast, and tied 5 anchors of it. We had 5 anchors on board, from ranging right down to a dinghy anchor, number 5, and we had the whole 5 in a line. And at high tide, I had to continually replant them, because as the waves came in, the boat would swing, and the mast came up, and the mast sprung up, and I can see those 5 anchors just going up into the air. They just didn't hold whatsoever. There was no holding power. The sand was really strange. It would squeak when you walked on it. It was very, very fine, very, very fine. And so I had to keep replanting them, which was a total waste of time. And then on one day, I remember looking out, and the natives had come this time with clubs, big giant clubs and sticks. Maybe one had an axe as well. No, I can't remember. Maybe they're just clubs. But anyway, they must have had an axe, because they cut all the ropes, and the next time I looked, there were no ropes on the entire boat. And on a gaff-rigged boat, there are a lot of ropes, and every single rope went. And I felt, they must need them to tether their cattle. And so that was okay. And they must need them. We were just providing for all their needs. So I had no resentment. It was amazing, apart from when they took the transistor radio, because that was a practicality. You can't navigate without a radio. So that's the only time I was a bit cross, and that's the only time. But when I saw them, not just that they'd taken every single rope, they were now going to bash up the boat to make firewood, because they needed firewood, because on a desert there's not much firewood to make a fire for them to cook on, so I guess they needed some wood. So they started bashing my boat and smashing my boat. I got the rifle, and I got the loading, I pulled out the loading, it's a 22, and I pulled out the loading rod, and I was shaking at this stage, and I dropped the loading rod into the sand and picked it up, and it was full of sand, and I was just, there's no way I could get the loading rod in. I couldn't, so I chucked it away, and I just held the rifle and just looked menacing, as menacing as I could. And of course they didn't pay any attention to me, because by this time they realized I was not going to hurt anybody, and I was pretty pathetic. And I was just a walkover. And then another memory I have is of the leader of this group of beautiful young people, teenagers and children. The leader got up and he came to the entrance of my tent, and he looked at me, and he walked towards me, and I stood up, and I had my revolver, and there were still 2 bullets left in it, and he walked towards me, and I just kept holding the revolver level with his tummy, and he just called my bluff. He walked towards me, and then suddenly he reached out his hand, grabbed the revolver, and with his other hand he pushed me hard so that I flew over backwards and landed on my back and hit my head, but that's okay, and took off with my revolver. And I was only glad that I hadn't hurt anybody with it, because I probably would not be here today. He would have shot me. So yeah, so that was that. So yeah, what happened next? Maybe it's the end of the story. I remember coming to the end of my tether, you know, like I'd had nothing to eat, and I'd had bowls of milk, and I held on to one of these spars that is holding up the sail of this makeshift tent, and holding it, and I lifted my head up to the sky, and I screamed and cried and raged, and I raged at God for how dare you allow this to happen to me. A God I did not believe in. I didn't believe in God at that stage, but my heart did. I think, like, why would you be angry at a God you didn't even believe existed? You know, that's what the iniquity of the human heart.
And when you're on your last...
this is the end.
There's not much sleep.
No sleep.
No food.
No sleep, no food. And
if you
having...
really didn't believe there was God, you wouldn't think about that.
It's strange, isn't it? But I remember raging, because I've spent years repenting of that. So, but that's just the state of a little person about to die, and I didn't really want to die. I was only 20, and I thought, well, I haven't really lived very long, and it would be nice to live a bit longer. And yeah, so that incident, I remember that, and then I calmed down. And then the next memory I have is of the rescue. I suddenly saw far in the distance two tiny things moving along the beach, and it was low tide, and those dots grew bigger and bigger. I realized those were vehicles, and the dots grew, and I realized there were 2 Land Rovers, and they pulled up at the beach just below my tent thing, and out jumped 2 beautiful, handsome blonde Americans. And it was so lovely to see, you know, I'm not racist, but it was so lovely to see 2 blonde Americans come out of the car. Their Land Rover obviously come to rescue me. So I flew down the beach and ran into the arms of the first one and said, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And they didn't quite know how to handle this strange little person. But anyway, they packed up what was left of our possessions, and they put our dinghy on top of them, and yeah, so there was nothing left, and looked at our boat that was on the beach with no ropes and bashed up, and the end of that, and we just drove off. And I was very shy. I didn't speak to them, and I don't know that they ever spoke to me. I've got no memory of any conversation, which was a bit strange. But they drove to the nearest village, which would be 60 kilometers down that beach, and it was late. It was the next night, and they paid for me to stay in an inn at this African village. There was an inn, and then carried on the journey the next. I remember looking in the mirror and looking behind me to see who that person was in the mirror, because it wasn't me. And I turned around, there was nobody behind me, so I turned back and I thought, oh my goodness, that must be me. I didn't even recognize myself. I think the trauma disfigured my face or something. I just didn't recognize myself. Anyway, a passing memory. And then they drove me to where Herman and my sister were. And now, what's the story? How did they come there? Their story. Herman and my sister had left with 2 liters of water and walked inland to try and find this road. And their story is that they walked till they had no more water, and then they lay down and didn't think they would survive. They thought, they couldn't find a road. And then they got up and sort of just about crawled, and over the next sand dune they found a road, and like a miracle, in a very short time, a rattly old native bus came along, picked them up, drove them into the city. Somehow, I don't even know the complete story, somehow they got from that rattly old African bus into the city, into the port. And in the port, his idea was to try and find a tugboat, some kind of a tugboat to motor up the coast to pull our boat off the beach to save her. But he couldn't find any tugboat willing to do such a thing. That he found a group of German people, and because he's Austrian, he spoke German, and they ran an early vegetable, they grew market garden vegetables for the European market, and they had a team of workers that had Land Rovers, and they had radios, and they radioed to two of these Land Rovers with instructions of roughly where we were, and they were to drive along the beach until they found a wreck and a tent and a little girl. And so that's how the Americans got there. So that's that story. And then so I remember being deposited at a beautiful yacht club. There was a French, it was Senegal, Dakar's in Senegal.